A waterfall chart is one of the best ways to show how values increase or decrease step by step, especially when you want to break down how you got from a starting point to a total. So I'm going to show how to build a waterfall chart using income statement data. And to build this, we first need to pivot the data. So I'm going to start by selecting all the metrics within this data set. Then I'm going to right-click and hit Pivot. This gives us pivot names and pivot values, which are much more flexible than measure names and measure values. And we only need two simple calculated fields for this. So I'm bringing in pivot field names and pivot field values so you can see the back end of how we're transforming the data. Right now, everything, even things like cost of goods sold, show as positive values. So the first calculated field I'm creating is just going to identify which field should be treated as negatives. So I'll type if the pivot field names equals the cost of goods sold, the income tax, the interest expense, or the operating expenses, then do negative of the pivot field values. Else we want the positive of the pivot field values. You can skip this step if your values are already in positive and negative form. So when I bring this new field in, you can see all of our costs or expenses are negative. And if you have other metrics in your data set that you don't want to include in your waterfall chart, you can use the pivot field names to filter them out. Then I'll create another calculated field to identify where values should start. I'll write a calculation so that if pivot field names is a field that's a calculation itself, like how gross profit is revenue minus cost of goods sold, it'll have a starting position of 0. Else, I want to use the values with the positive and negatives to identify where to start. So when I bring this in, you can see calculations start at 0. And that's because these represent a subtotal or total, so they're not an additional flow of money. They're acting as checkpoints to show the results so far. Whereas fields like revenue or cost of goods sold keep their actual values because we want to show the true inflows and outflows along the way. To build out the waterfall chart, which just takes a few steps, I'm going to remove everything from the view to build it from scratch. I'll start by pulling pivot field names into the columns. To get these in the right order, I'll sort the pivot field names. I'll choose to sort this manually and put this in the same order as the income statement. And the order here matters because each step builds on the previous one. Then I'll drag our starting field into the rows. And you can see that COGS shows the correct value, but it's not factoring in the step before, which is revenue. So I'll right-click on the starting field, go to Quick Table Calculation, and select Running Total. Since bar charts always start at 0, but in a waterfall chart we need to control where each bar starts, I'm going to change the mark type from bar to a Gantt bar. And this is going to give us a floating bar that we can control, both the starting point and the length. So now all the bars start at the right place based on the steps that came before, but they aren't filled in yet. So I'll bring our positive and negative values field into the marks. Even though the values have positive and negatives, Tableau treats size like an absolute value and just grows the bars outwards. So I'm adding a negative sign to flip the directions, so decreases actually move down instead of up. Then I'll make this determine the size. Now we have the basic structure of the waterfall chart, showing positive flows like revenue, negative flows like cost of goods sold, and subtotals like gross profit. Next, I'm going to format this to make it more intuitive. I'll start by adding the values to the marks card so we can make it a label for each bar. Then I'll format the values so I can change the number formatting to a custom currency. I'll change it to be in billions with 1 decimal place. And my dataset has more than just 1 year. So I'm going to filter by date so I'm looking at just this year's income statement. I also want to use colors to help tell the story. So I'll drag pivot field names into the marks card and make it determine the color of each bar. I'll make positive flows like revenue green, negative flows like cost of goods sold, expenses, and taxes red. I'm going to use gray for subtotals and totals like gross profit and net income. And now with these colors, it makes the chart instantly scannable. In just a few minutes, we built a waterfall chart. It's a clear way to show how values add or subtract on the way to your total. And while I used it for income statement data here, there's many use cases, like budget tracking or variance analysis.